Imagine being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, your voice ignored, your potential questioned. Now, imagine turning all of that into something that transforms not only your life but the lives of countless others. This is the journey of Imani Brooks, a young black woman working as a tutor in a quiet Arizona suburb, who was told she didn't have what it takes to make a real difference. But she proved them wrong. In The Educator They Ignored, Imani's story unfolds, showing us that the true power of education goes beyond textbooks and grades. It lies in the heart, in the emotional development that shapes who we become. Her work, which starts with a single tutoring session, grows into a global movement that challenges the very foundation of how we educate our children. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of change, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories just like this one. Now, as you listen, I invite you to reflect. How can we change the way we educate and nurture the next generation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Let's begin. The Educator They Ignored tells the inspiring story of Imani Brooks, a young black woman working as a tutor in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Arizona. Despite her passion for teaching and unique approach to emotional education, she faces skepticism and doubt from the parents of her students, who see her as inexperienced and unqualified. But Imani's belief in the power of emotional literacy and character development drives her forward. When her groundbreaking book on children's emotional growth becomes an international bestseller, Imani's work is suddenly recognized on a much larger scale. As her influence spreads, from local classrooms to state policies, she shows the world that education is not just about academics, but about nurturing the whole child. The Educator They Ignored is a story about overcoming doubt, believing in yourself, and challenging the traditional norms of education. It's about the power of vulnerability, compassion, and persistence in creating meaningful change. Join Imani on her journey as she goes from being an overlooked tutor to an advocate for a global movement in emotional education, proving that the quietest voices can sometimes have the most profound impact. Will Imani's work change the way we educate future generations? Listen to her journey and find out. Disclaimer: the story you are about to hear is entirely fictional. While the characters, events, and settings are a product of imagination, the moral lessons, motivation, and inspiration shared throughout the video are intended to offer valuable insights and encourage personal growth. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. This story is designed to inspire, educate, and provoke thought, and it is not intended to represent any specific individual or real-life events. Viewer discretion is advised, and we encourage you to engage with the themes presented in a spirit of learning and reflection. The desert sun pressed down on the tiled roofs of Scottsdale like a persistent hand, warm and unrelenting. The sidewalks were quiet in the early afternoon, broken only by the occasional jogger or the hum of distant lawnmowers. In this corner of Arizona suburbia, where every home looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, impressions mattered. So did appearances. And for a young woman like Imani Brooks, that truth made itself known on her very first day. Imani adjusted her navy blouse in the rearview mirror of her compact car. Her locks were pulled into a neat bun, her makeup minimal, her expression composed. She took a breath, gathered her tote bag full of books and learning games, and stepped out onto the pristine driveway of the McAllister home. It was her fourth client since arriving in Scottsdale, and her nerves hadn't quite settled yet. It wasn't the children that unnerved her. It was the parents. The door opened before she had a chance to knock. A tall woman with platinum blonde hair, dressed in sleek yoga attire, gave Imani a once-over. "You must be Imani," the woman said, her tone clipped but polite. "You're younger than I expected." Imani smiled, extending her hand. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here for Noah's first session." The woman, Mrs. McAllister, presumably, hesitated just a breath before accepting the handshake. "We're hoping you can help him with reading comprehension. He's very bright. We just don't want him falling behind." "You've worked with advanced learners, haven't you?" "I have," Imani replied. "I've worked with a range of students, including gifted learners and those needing support in emotional development." Mrs. McAllister nodded vaguely, already half turned toward the interior. "Right. Well, the playroom's this way. Noah's in there with the nanny." As Imani followed her through the house, she passed family portraits on white walls, glass vases placed just so on marble counters. Everything was perfect, coldly perfect. In the playroom, an 8-year-old boy sat curled up with a tablet, headphones on. He looked up, eyes wary, and then quickly returned to his screen. "Hi, Noah," Imani said gently. He didn't respond. Mrs. McAllister sighed. He takes a while to warm up to people. Don't expect much today. Just see what you can do. The door shut behind her with a muted click. Imani lowered herself to the carpet beside Noah and waited. No sudden movements. No forced friendliness. After a few moments, she asked, "What are you watching?" He peeked at her. "It's a science thing. About volcanoes." "That's cool. Did you know there's a kind of lava that moves so slowly, it looks like it's crawling?" That got him. He turned to her, curious. And so it began. Imani's first session with Noah was a quiet victory. By the end of the hour, he had not only talked to her, but he had also read 2 pages of a storybook aloud. Small steps. But for a boy who barely spoke to adults, it was something. Still, when she stepped out into the kitchen to debrief, Mrs. McAllister's reaction was lukewarm. "He read? He never does that." "Well, maybe it's beginner's luck." Imani smiled again, the same way she had learned to smile in grad school when professors questioned her thesis ideas. "It's a start. We'll build from here." As she drove away, her phone buzzed with a message from another parent, her next client. A rescheduling request. Again. Her days continued like this for weeks. Children who hesitated at first but slowly leaned into her kindness, her patience. And parents who remained stiff, distant, polite at best. They praised her punctuality, complimented her smile, but always with a veil of doubt. They introduced her as the new tutor, never using her name, never acknowledging the depth of what she offered. At night, in her small apartment just outside the neighborhood, Imani wrote. Her desk was cluttered with notebooks, case studies, and coffee mugs. Her fingers moved over the keys, unloading thoughts that had been locked behind her careful smiles all day. She wrote about the children, about the pressure they faced, about how character was being pushed aside for competition, about the things she wished the parents understood but didn't. The pages grew, slow but steady, shaping themselves into something bigger than a journal. Something that looked suspiciously like a book. She didn't dare call it that. Not yet. One evening, while tutoring a girl named Olivia who struggled with self-doubt despite excelling at every subject, Imani handed her a blank card. "What's this for?" Olivia asked. "Write down one thing you like about yourself." The girl looked uncertain. "Anything," Imani said. "Doesn't have to be big." After a minute, Olivia wrote something. Imani didn't ask to see it. Next week, the card was still in Olivia's backpack. A small thing. But it stayed with her. Parents never asked about those moments. They only wanted test scores, checklists, data points. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating session in which a father spent 20 minutes lecturing her on how his son needed discipline, not all this emotional stuff, Imani sat in her car with her head resting on the steering wheel. The sun glared through the windshield. She didn't cry. She didn't break. But she felt the familiar ache, like running a race no one was watching. Later that night, she wrote, "They want results without relationship, growth without grace, discipline without dialogue." And then, in bold letters on the first page of a new document, "Rooted hearts, raising children with courage, kindness, and purpose." The tutor they didn't believe in had started writing the book that would one day make them all listen. Imani's apartment was modest but full of warmth, sunlight slipping in through linen curtains in the late afternoon, casting golden streaks across her hardwood floor. It wasn't much, just a second-floor walk-up with peeling paint near the balcony, but it was hers. Her sanctuary. The only place where she didn't have to smile through silence or explain her worth to people who had already decided she didn't have any. By day, she was the woman parents barely acknowledged. By night, she was an architect of something larger. She sat at her desk, fingers moving quickly, heart wide open. She filled pages with real stories, not just of the children she taught, but of the invisible struggles hidden between their perfect test scores and tightly packed schedules. She wrote of resilience, of kindness, of strength built not through punishment but through presence. The kind that came when adults listened, truly listened, to the small voices they so often overlooked. Each chapter she wrote felt like breathing. The book wasn't a dream anymore. It was becoming something living, something urgent. Still, her days in Scottsdale continued much the same. She arrived on time, wore her best smile, and showed up fully for every child. The parents rarely met her eyes. Some of them asked if she was working toward something else. Others assumed this was a stepping stone, not a choice. One even asked if she had ever considered a more formal teaching job. As if what she did, guiding children one-on-one through emotional storms, learning barriers and self-worth struggles, wasn't already deeply educational. One particular afternoon, Imani arrived at the Whitmore residence, where she'd been working with a boy named Jacob for nearly a month. Jacob had been labeled difficult, prone to tantrums and mood swings. But Imani saw something else. A sensitive boy trapped in an environment that demanded perfection. That day he was sitting quietly, holding a drawing he didn't want anyone to see. "Did you draw this?" she asked gently, sitting beside him on the carpet. He nodded, then turned the paper toward her. It was a sketch of a knight, small and alone on a hilltop, facing down a dragon twice his size. At the bottom he'd written, "No one believes in me, but I still try." Imani felt the word strike like lightning. She looked him in the eyes. "Jacob, this is powerful." He shrugged. "It's just a picture." "No," she said, placing the drawing carefully on the floor between them. "It's you. You're the knight. And that means you're brave." He blinked, then nodded just once. Later she told his mother about the drawing. Mrs. Whitmore barely reacted. "He's always been dramatic," she said, sipping her iced coffee. "We try to discourage all that fantasy stuff. It's not productive." Imani didn't argue. She never did. She had learned that the more she pushed, the less they heard. Instead, she tucked Jacob's story into her memory and later that night into her book. Children speak in symbols. Listen closely. Sometimes their deepest truths arrive in dragons and daydreams. The next day, she met with a new client. The mother, Mrs. Caldwell, greeted her with the usual tight-lipped smile and a clipboard in hand. "We just need someone to help Annabelle stay focused. No games, no feelings. Just results." Imani paused. "I understand structure is important," she said, "but I also believe emotional development is essential for sustained growth." Mrs. Caldwell blinked. "We're not paying for therapy." She wanted to walk away, right then and there. But she didn't. She stayed. Because Annabelle, quiet and bright, sat just behind her mother with a tightness around her mouth that Imani recognized. Another child on the verge of folding inward. Another chance to keep the light from going out. That night, after another long session and another dismissive conversation with a parent, Imani sat at her desk and stared at the document open on her screen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed the next section. They call it soft. As if kindness is weak. As if empathy doesn't move mountains. By now, her book was nearing completion. 200 pages of reflection, stories, strategies, and research-based methods woven together by heart. She didn't know if anyone would read it, but she knew it needed to exist. A friend from grad school, Khalil, called her that weekend. "You're really doing it," he said, his voice proud. "You're finishing the book." "Almost," Imani replied, smiling faintly. "Now comes the scary part." "Publishing?" "No. Believing that people might care." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They will. Especially the ones who need it most." Imani hung up feeling both light and terrified. She had never been the type to chase attention. But she had something to say. And even if no one listened, the truth had to be spoken. A week later, the final manuscript was complete. She formatted it, designed a simple cover, and uploaded it to Amazon under the title she had scribbled down in the middle of a hard day, Rooted Hearts. Raising children with courage, kindness, and purpose. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't expect much. But something strange happened. A mother in another state stumbled across it while searching for books on child psychology. She read it in a day, then wrote a review. Another teacher found it through a recommendation algorithm. Then a parenting blogger posted about it, praising its authenticity and warmth. It began slowly, like water breaking through a dam. And then it moved faster. Sales doubled, then tripled. Reviews flooded in. Readers from all over the country, then from abroad, shared quotes on social media. One post went viral. People were reading her. People were hearing her. And still, the family she worked with had no idea. Not yet. But that was about to change. The shift began subtly. At first, it was just a few more phone calls than usual. Parents asking for reschedules rather than cancellations. Then came the email from a mother Imani had never met, inquiring about private tutoring. She mentioned the book by name. "Are you the same Imani Brooks who wrote Rooted Hearts? If so, I would love to get on your schedule. My daughter struggles with self-regulation, and your chapter on emotional scaffolding was eye-opening." Imani stared at the screen, heart pounding. She hadn't advertised, hadn't done interviews. Word was spreading on its own. The next day, while preparing for a session with Olivia, she overheard Mrs. Whitmore speaking with another mother on the phone in the foyer. "I've been reading this book, Rooted Hearts. Some of it is a bit idealistic, but honestly it made me rethink a few things. Especially with Jacob. The author, some woman named Imani Brooks. I think she's local. Black woman. Young. Can you believe that?" Imani paused, holding a stack of flashcards in her hand. She smiled quietly to herself. Not from vanity, but from the surreal confirmation that something she'd written had pierced through the wall. By the end of the week, her inbox was flooded. A major parenting podcast requested an interview. A district counselor from California emailed her, asking to use chapters of the book for a staff training. The Washington Post reached out for comment on a feature about progressive parenting trends. And yet, in Scottsdale, she still showed up to the same beige houses, with the same tight smiles, the same tone of cautious detachment. Until the day of the Caldwell incident. Imani had just finished a session with Annabelle, who had proudly read a short poem she'd written about her feelings, and stepped into the kitchen to debrief with Mrs. Caldwell. But this time, the mother's demeanor was different. She looked flustered. Her phone was in her hand and she was staring at it like it had betrayed her. "Imani," she began, voice uncertain. "Why didn't you tell me you wrote a book?" Imani froze for a fraction of a second, then answered with measured calm. "I didn't think it was relevant to my sessions with Annabelle." Mrs. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "It's very relevant. I just found out because my sister sent me a link. She said it's all over parenting forums." Imani waited. "I read a few chapters. I think I misjudged your approach. That was all. No apology. Just a shift. But for someone like Mrs. Caldwell, it was seismic." A week later, Imani arrived to find a new energy buzzing around the neighborhood. Olivia's mother handed her a printout. "I hope you don't mind," she said, a little breathless. "I looked up your book after a colleague mentioned it. It's beautiful. I sent it to my sister in Oregon. She's a school counselor. She already ordered copies for her team." It was the first time any of them had looked at her with admiration instead of suspicion. The Whitmores invited her to stay for coffee after a session. The McAllisters apologized for their initial impressions. Within 2 months, she was no longer just the tutor. She was Ms. Brooks, the author. She was invited to speak at parent workshops, quoted in articles, and tagged in Instagram posts beside photos of bedtime reading routines. The same families who once questioned her credentials were now quoting her work. The children sensed the change too. They began introducing her to their friends. They shared what they'd learned from her with classmates. One boy even asked if she could sign his copy of her book. Still, Imani remained grounded. She continued showing up to each session with the same care, the same quiet strength. Not because she had something to prove anymore, but because the work mattered. It had always mattered. Her apartment didn't change. Her wardrobe didn't suddenly shift into designer labels. But her presence, her confidence, her ease in her own skin, those things deepened. One evening, after a long day filled with sessions, media requests, and a late call from a London-based parenting organization asking for rights to translate the book into 3 languages, Imani sat on her balcony with a cup of tea. The sky was a burnished orange. The desert breeze was soft against her cheeks. She thought of Jacob's drawing, of Olivia's quiet card, of Annabelle's poem. She had given them tools. But they had given her something too, a reason to keep writing, keep teaching, keep believing. And finally, the world had started to believe with her. News of Imani's book didn't just echo through the quiet cul-de-sacs of Scottsdale, it leapt across state lines, over oceans, into classrooms and homes far from Arizona's sun-bleached sidewalks. Within weeks, Rooted Hearts appeared on multiple bestseller lists, not in the commercial sense of celebrity fluff, but in the niche corners where real change brews. Education blogs, child development forums, and international parenting collectives began spotlighting her work. The phrase Rooted Hearts approach was adopted by a growing number of educators and therapists seeking a more compassionate framework for working with children. Imani's inbox became a stream of invitations. Conferences in Chicago, Zoom panels hosted by European think tanks, mentorship requests from graduate students in New Delhi and Cape Town. Her words were traveling faster than she ever had. Yet even amid the chaos of her rising profile, Imani insisted on preserving one thing: her tutoring. The parents were baffled. Some assumed she'd resign and focus on her growing platform. But she didn't. She kept her sessions, still arrived on time, still brought homemade learning tools and hand-illustrated flashcards. It wasn't about humility. It was about grounding. The work, the actual one-on-one moments with children, was her compass. It wasn't long before her story reached the media. A journalist from the Arizona Republic requested an interview. "We're fascinated," she said. "A local tutor writes a book, and it becomes an international movement. How does that happen?" Imani's reply was simple: "I listen to the children." The article was titled "The Educator They Ignored," and within 24 hours, it was picked up by national outlets. The headline struck a chord. Teachers shared it. Parents debated it. Community organizers quoted it during school board meetings. Then came the moment that would change everything. The Arizona State Education Conference reached out and invited Imani to keynote their opening session. It was the largest gathering of educators, policymakers, and administrators in the region. Normally, the keynote was reserved for tenured professors, directors of policy, or superintendents. But this year they wanted her. The night before the event, Imani stood in front of her mirror, rehearsing her words. Her speech wasn't polished with corporate ease. It was steady, personal, and full of truth. When she stepped onto the stage the next day, her heart thudded like a drum inside her chest. Hundreds of faces stared back, some curious, some skeptical, some hopeful. She began not with a quote, but with a story. A little boy once handed me a drawing of a knight fighting a dragon. He said, "No one believes in me, but I still try." That knight was Jacob. But that knight was also me. And maybe, that knight is you. The room was silent. I wrote Rooted Hearts because I was tired of watching children shrink to fit the systems built around them. I wanted to offer something more human. And I believe every educator in this room is capable of that too. By the end of the speech, she received a standing ovation. Not for show. For recognition. Back in Scottsdale, her students' parents began to change too. Not just in how they saw Imani, but in how they saw their own children. Conversations after sessions became deeper. One father admitted he had never thought to ask his daughter how she felt about her schedule. Another mother broke down in tears after reading the chapter on parental validation. "You wrote what I never had," she whispered to Imani after a session. "And now I want to give it to my kids." Imani nodded. She understood. The ripple effect grew. Local schools invited her to conduct teacher workshops. Her book became required reading for a regional education training course. She started a podcast. Short episodes, each one centered around a small but powerful theme. Grace, listening, repair, laughter. The podcast soared into the top 10 in the education category within a month. But still, her favorite part of the week was sitting cross-legged on a carpet next to a child with a crayon in their hand, telling her something true. One afternoon, while helping Jacob with a vocabulary exercise, he paused and looked up at her. "Are you famous now?" Imani laughed. "Depends on who you ask." He grinned. "I told my teacher you helped me be brave." She smiled and her voice was soft but firm. "You helped yourself be brave. I just reminded you what was already there." The boy nodded like he understood something bigger than words. That night, as she walked back to her apartment beneath a purple-orange sky, she thought about the journey so far. Not the book sales, not the articles, but the space she had carved out where once there was only silence. The way her name was now spoken with reverence in the same homes where it had once been met with polite dismissal. And still she was just beginning. The invitations didn't stop. Each week brought new offers, panels, podcasts, workshops, collaborations. But the most surprising came in an embossed envelope delivered to her door by courier. It was an invitation to the National Forum on Character Education, hosted in Washington, D.C. A multi-day event attended by government officials, psychologists, educators, and nonprofit leaders from across the country. Not only was she asked to attend, she was offered the keynote. Imani stood in her kitchen holding the letter, her tea forgotten and cooling by the window. She reread the words slowly, deliberately, as if they might disappear. Only a year ago, she had walked through these suburban streets with her head high but her worth quietly questioned. Now, her voice was being sought in rooms where policy was shaped, where children's futures were planned on whiteboards and behind long mahogany desks. She didn't hesitate. She said yes. Preparations began quickly. She updated her wardrobe with a tailored navy suit, clean lines and subtle gold earrings. Not for appearances but to honor the moment. To walk into that room fully herself, unmuted and unbowed. The day of the keynote arrived with rain. Washington skies were heavy and gray, a stark contrast to Arizona's dry warmth. But inside the marble-paneled conference hall, all eyes were on her. She stood behind the podium, took a breath and began. "I am here because I refuse to let silence shape my story. And because a child once showed me that even a whisper of belief can ignite something unshakable." She told them about Scottsdale. About the whispered doubt behind every compliment. About being seen as temporary, a gap filler, an assistant to something greater. She told them about the children. Jacob's night, Annabelle's poem, Olivia's quiet resilience. She told them the truth, that too many children were being molded to fit systems that never made space for their hearts. "The future we want," she said, her voice calm but cutting, won't be built by controlling children into obedience. It will be built by guiding them into character. With patience, with trust, with love that listens. When she finished, the applause began. Long, sustained, rising in waves. But even louder than the clapping was the quiet voice inside her saying, "You did this. Not by pushing through the front door, but by planting roots no one saw, until they bloomed." The media coverage was immediate. The speech was quoted in educational journals and reposted on national teacher forums. Her words, clipped into viral videos, danced across timelines and teacher lounges alike. Back in Arizona, the impact rippled even further. One afternoon, as Imani was wrapping up a session with Annabelle, Mrs. Caldwell stepped into the room with a softness Imani had never seen in her before. "I watched your speech," she said. Imani looked up, waited. "I didn't realize how much of you I was missing." There were no more masks in her voice, no more clipped professionalism, just a woman humbled by reflection. "I wish I'd seen you sooner," she added. "I'm sorry I didn't." Imani didn't need the apology, but she accepted it with grace. Not out of pride, but because the world was finally learning. That same week, she received an email from her former graduate school. They wanted to create a fellowship in her name for young educators of color focused on emotional literacy and character education. The Imani Brooks Fellowship. It was almost too much to take in. One evening, sitting with Khalil on a rooftop in downtown Phoenix after a radio interview, she sipped ginger tea while city lights flickered below. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" he asked. Imani smiled. "I never left it. The work is still quiet, still slow, still sacred." He nodded. "You know," she added, "the most dramatic thing isn't fame. It's being seen. Fully seen. After being invisible for so long." Khalil raised his cup in a quiet toast. To visibility. Imani looked out over the city. Her city now. Not just a place she survived, but a place where her name had weight. Where children knew they were allowed to feel. Where parents were learning that control was no substitute for connection. The table had turned. And she had earned her seat. Not by force, but by planting truth where no one expected it to grow. The quiet apartment Imani once returned to every evening was no longer a retreat from doubt. It had become a space of creation. A small writing desk near her window now held notebooks, voice memos, and half-finished drafts of her second book. But it wasn't just writing that filled her days now. She had formed something new. The Rooted Hearts Initiative. It began with a small grant and a simple goal: to provide character education resources to underfunded schools across Arizona. But as word spread, support came from unlikely places. A tech company from Seattle offered to sponsor classroom kits. A literacy nonprofit in Georgia offered to translate her materials into Spanish. Her old community center from Chicago reached out, asking if they could host a virtual training for their volunteer tutors. The initiative grew quickly, not because of buzz, but because it met a need that had been overlooked for too long. Her workshops, now streamed across the country, weren't filled with lofty theory. They were grounded, honest, human. Imani insisted that every facilitator be trained not just in content, but in listening. That was the foundation of her approach. One day, while reviewing feedback from a pilot school in Tucson, her phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Brooks, this is Dr. Lena Haynes, Director of the Arizona Department of Education. I've been following your work closely. I'd like to discuss a potential advisory role with our statewide character and emotional learning framework. Please let me know if you're open to meeting." Imani sat still for a moment. A year ago, her voice had barely made it past the walls of living rooms filled with hesitant parents. Now, policymakers wanted her insight on the state level. When she arrived at the department building a week later, she was greeted not with a waiting room clipboard, but with a boardroom filled with decision-makers ready to hear what she had to say. Dr. Haynes shook her hand warmly. "I've read your book 3 times, she admitted. "What struck me wasn't just your clarity, it was your compassion. You remind us that education isn't about performance. It's about formation." Imani spent the next hour outlining her vision, a curriculum that didn't just prepare students for tests, but for life. Modules on empathy, on apology, on resilience and justice. Lessons that didn't treat emotions like obstacles, but as maps. The board approved her recommendations unanimously. Soon, schools across the state received access to Rooted Hearts companion guides, lesson plans, video prompts, and activity sets rooted in Imani's core philosophy. The media called it revolutionary. She called it overdue. Back in Scottsdale, her old clients still kept in touch. Olivia wrote her a letter when she got into middle school, thanking Imani for teaching her how to speak up. Jacob, now more confident and thriving, mailed her a drawing of a knight standing on a bridge with the caption, "Thank you for building this." But not every response was celebratory. At one workshop in a conservative district, a parent accused her of softening discipline. "Children need structure," he snapped. "You're telling them feelings matter more than behavior." Imani didn't flinch. "I'm telling them that all behavior is communication. If we listen carefully, we won't have to punish as much. We'll understand more." The room fell quiet. Later, a teacher pulled her aside. "No one's ever said that out loud here. Thank you." She was not building a brand. She was building a bridge. Between generations. Between policy and practice. Between the child no one believed in and the adult who now stood before the world with a voice they couldn't ignore. And then, on a bright morning in April, the most unexpected call came. The White House. A senior advisor to the President of the United States had read her book, seen her speech, and wanted to explore the possibility of creating a national task force on emotional development in early education. Would she join? Imani paused, not because she doubted, but because the weight of the moment deserved silence before speech. She said yes. And just like that, the girl they once overlooked was now part of shaping the future of children across the country. But she never let it change her rhythm. She still met with her small team every Monday. Still recorded her podcast episodes in her quiet home studio. Still walked the same desert trails on Sundays with Khalil, now her closest confidant and creative partner. Imani had stepped into the light. But her power had always come from what was rooted beneath. She was no longer waiting to be recognized. She was too busy building something that would outlive her name. The Arizona morning sun filtered gently through the slatted blinds of Imani's studio as she reviewed the final manuscript of her second book. Its title had come to her not during a grand speech or a moment of triumph, but in the quiet space between tutoring sessions. It was simple and it was honest, raised in respect. Unlike Rooted Hearts, this one wasn't just for educators or parents. It was for the children who had grown up and wondered why they carried invisible bruises from the words that were supposed to shape them. It was for the adults still learning how to love themselves the way they should have been loved from the start. She wrote not to fix anyone, but to hold a mirror. The publisher sent back the final cover design. Plain. Elegant. A silhouette of a child planting seeds in soil that bloomed with words like courage, empathy, and honesty. The book launched quietly at first, then exploded. Late-night talk shows invited her for interviews. Mental health influencers shared quotes. Universities created discussion panels around its message. International leaders asked to translate the work into multiple languages for global educational initiatives. Imani wasn't chasing the light anymore. It followed her. At the same time, the Rooted Hearts initiative opened its first physical center in South Phoenix. A modest brick building with warm lights, shelves lined with books, rugs for reading circles, and walls covered in art made by children from across the state. It was a space for training, for healing, for belonging. The grand opening drew community members, educators, and former students. Among them was Jacob, now a teen with a quiet confidence in his stride. He hugged her tightly when he saw her. "I'm mentoring younger kids now," he said, "helping them be brave." Imani smiled. "That's how change multiplies." He handed her a note. On the front, in neat handwriting, were the words, "For when you forget." Inside it read, "You're not just teaching us. You're teaching the world how to see us." It hit her harder than she expected. Even now, with all the accolades and interviews, it was this handwritten note, this proof of impact, that reminded her why she started. As the months passed, her work began to inspire larger change. Statewide education policies were rewritten to include emotional development benchmarks. Teacher colleges began offering full courses based on her methodology. A Netflix documentary team followed her for 6 months, chronicling her journey from local tutor to global voice. But Imani kept her feet on the ground. Every Saturday, she still hosted a reading circle at the center. She'd sit cross-legged with a dozen kids and let them lead. Sometimes they read. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they cried. And every time she listened. During one of those circles, a young girl named Soraya asked her, "Are you famous?" Imani chuckled. "I'm not sure." Soraya tilted her head. "But you're always here. Don't famous people leave?" Imani reached over and took her hand. "The kind of famous I want to be never leaves the room." Later that night, Imani walked through the center after closing. The halls were silent, but alive with the energy of everything they had built. She stopped by the wall that held a quote from her first book. "We don't raise perfect children. We raise whole ones." Below it were framed photographs, students, parents, facilitators, mentors. Each one a living testament to the work that began in a quiet Arizona living room with little more than crayons, questions, and belief. In that moment, Imani realized something. Legacy wasn't built in speeches or awards. It was built in the small moments of being present, in the courage to tell the truth gently, and in the persistence of returning to the children over and over again even when the world looks away. Imani Brooks had been underestimated, doubted, dismissed. But she had not been broken. She had written herself into the story. And now, generations would read her name, not just in books or lesson plans, but in the hearts of those who finally knew they were worth listening to. The end. Moral lessons from The Educator They Ignored. 1. The power of patience and persistence. In the face of doubt and underestimation, Imani's journey exemplifies the power of patience and persistence. From the moment she began her tutoring career, Imani was underestimated by both parents and peers who didn't believe she had the experience to make a difference. The story teaches that true success does not always come quickly or easily, and the road to achievement is often filled with obstacles, setbacks, and skepticism from others. Imani's persistence in staying true to her belief in emotional education, even when she was disregarded, showcases how important it is to remain committed to one's vision, especially when external validation is lacking. Her perseverance in continuing her work as a tutor, despite the growing attention from the media and educational world, demonstrates that success is not always measured by immediate recognition or accolades, but by the steady, unwavering commitment to one's mission. The lesson here is that patience and persistence are essential qualities in achieving long-term success. Imani's consistent effort to show up for her students, day in and day out, despite not receiving instant rewards, eventually led to a broader recognition of her expertise. For anyone on a similar journey, this teaches that the impact of their work will eventually be felt, even if it takes time for others to recognize its true value. 2. Embracing vulnerability and compassion in education. One of the central themes of The Educator They Ignored is the importance of vulnerability and compassion in the learning process. Imani's approach to tutoring goes beyond traditional academic instruction. Instead, she prioritizes emotional development, understanding that the emotional well-being of a child is foundational to their success. Throughout the story, Imani shows that being emotionally present for students, understanding their unique struggles, and providing a safe space for them to express themselves is just as important as teaching them academic subjects. Her empathy allows her to see the children not just as students but as individuals with unique experiences and emotions. This emotional intelligence sets her apart from other educators who focus primarily on intellectual achievement. The lesson to be learned here is that education is not just about imparting knowledge but also about nurturing the emotional and psychological growth of students. Teachers, parents, and mentors should create spaces where children feel safe to express themselves and be vulnerable. When emotional needs are met, students are more likely to succeed academically and personally. 3. The importance of believing in yourself. Imani's story also teaches the importance of believing in oneself, especially in the face of doubt and rejection. Early on in her career, she faced significant skepticism. The parents of her students didn't take her seriously, often questioning her methods and experience. Despite this, Imani continued to trust her approach, believing that she had something valuable to offer. This belief in her own abilities fueled her success. Her story demonstrates that belief in one's self-worth, even when others do not see it, is essential for overcoming adversity. Imani didn't allow others' limited perceptions to define her. Instead, she held steadfast to her values and stayed true to her purpose. The lesson here is that personal belief is a powerful tool for success. When others doubt you, it can be difficult, but self-confidence and faith in one's abilities are essential in pushing through those challenges. It's important to trust your instincts and know that in time your value will be recognized. 4. The ripple effect of good work. Imani's work didn't stop with her students. Her approach to character education, grounded in emotional literacy and empathy, had a profound ripple effect. Her methods were initially confined to small, local tutoring sessions, but as her book gained attention and her initiatives expanded, her influence spread far beyond her own community. The story highlights how one individual's dedication to doing meaningful work can create a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond what was initially imagined. Imani's impact didn't just end with the students she worked with directly. It expanded to educators, policymakers, parents, and other children, ultimately changing the way people viewed education and emotional development. The moral lesson here is that good work, especially work rooted in authenticity and compassion, has the power to create lasting change. One person's efforts can inspire others and lead to a broader societal shift. It reinforces the idea that small acts of kindness, compassion, and dedication can echo across the world in ways we might never fully comprehend. 5. Overcoming external expectations to define your own success. As Imani's story unfolds, we see her move from being a local tutor dismissed by others to becoming an internationally recognized thought leader in education. A significant part of this transformation is her ability to reject the conventional definitions of success imposed by others and create her own path. Early on, many people, particularly the parents of her students, saw Imani as inexperienced and unqualified. They expected her to conform to the traditional norms of education, but Imani stayed true to her vision and created her own definition of success. She didn't seek validation through standard achievements like promotions or awards. Instead, she focused on the real, tangible impact she was having on children's lives. The story teaches that success is not always defined by society's standards. In fact, it often requires courage to forge a new path when the world around you expects conformity. Imani's ability to remain true to her own vision, rather than conforming to external expectations, led her to a success that was not only meaningful but also deeply fulfilling. The lesson here is that success is personal. It is defined by the values you hold and the impact you wish to make. The external recognition of your work may come later, but what matters most is staying true to your mission and finding fulfillment in the journey itself. 6. The value of emotional literacy in raising children. One of the most profound moral lessons from The Educator They Ignored is the importance of emotional literacy in children's development. Throughout her work, Imani emphasizes that children need to learn how to identify, express, and manage their emotions, just as much as they need to learn mathematics or reading. This focus on emotional intelligence helps children build resilience, empathy, and self-awareness, which are crucial skills for navigating life's challenges. In the story, Imani's methods not only help her students perform better academically but also equip them with the tools to become emotionally intelligent individuals. This allows them to handle setbacks, build stronger relationships, and approach the world with a sense of confidence and understanding. The lesson here is clear. Emotional literacy is essential for children's growth and success. As educators and parents, we must prioritize teaching children how to navigate their emotions, as this will ultimately prepare them for a more fulfilling life. Emotional intelligence is just as important, if not more so, than academic intelligence in shaping well-rounded individuals. 7. Challenging the status quo and advocating for change. Imani's story also teaches the importance of challenging the status quo when it comes to traditional educational systems. Early on, Imani recognizes the limitations of the educational system, which often focuses on standardized testing and rigid structures that ignore the emotional needs of students. Her advocacy for emotional learning and character development challenged long-held beliefs and opened the door for new approaches to education. The lesson here is that we should never stop questioning systems that are not serving the people they were created for. If something isn't working, we must be brave enough to propose new ways of doing things, even if it means going against established norms. Just like Imani, we have the power to advocate for change that will positively impact future generations. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the story of The Educator They Ignored. We hope that Imani's journey inspired you and reminded you of the power of believing in yourself, especially when others doubt you. Her story is a testament to the strength it takes to create lasting change, and we hope it sparked a new perspective on the way we think about education, personal growth, and emotional intelligence. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more motivational tales, life lessons, and inspiring stories that can help you navigate your own journey. Also, if you'd like to share your thoughts or reflect on what you learned today, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Be sure to check out some of our other videos to continue your journey of inspiration and learning. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next one.